He worked on projects like Choplifter HD, Hunted the Demon's Forge, most notably Halo 4, and he's currently working on a next-gen project with Ready at Dawn. He's going to give about an hour talk, and then we're going to have a 30-minute question and answer session at the end, so you'll be able to ask me questions. But without any further delay, Quentin Rezin.
Alright, how's everybody doing today? Not exactly the best weather, but it's good to be inside, good to be talking about video games. How are we doing on sound? Can people hear me in the back? Alright. Well, I will get started then. So my name is Quentin Rezin. I've been in the industry for a little over 5 years. You see here some of the games that I've worked on. These are projects that shipped. I'll talk a little bit later about a project that didn't ship. Yeah, it's been kind of an interesting ride, and so I was asked to come and just speak about that and sort of talk about if other people wanted to follow the footsteps of my journey, what those were, how they can achieve and learn from my experience. So just to get things started, this is me. As many of you may have recognized, this is me in the Weta Workshop version of the Halo Warthog. This was created for the ad campaign for Halo 3. It's a fully drivable vehicle. Has some interesting quirks to it, like they can actually control the front wheels and back wheels independently, so they can do something called crabbing, where you actually point the vehicle forward and it can move sideways, which is just crazy. This is what the in-game version looks like for those who aren't familiar with the series. If you aren't familiar with the series, you really should be. Halo 4 comes out in a month, and I think it's as good a place as any to get in and learn what the series is about. So just to go back for a minute, this, as you can probably see from my shirt, was an event called Halo Fest. It was a 10th anniversary celebration of the original Halo coming out. They re-released Halo with new graphics, and so this was part of celebrating that. So it was a pretty amazing event to be part of, and I know that what you guys really want to know is, like, how did I get there? How did I work on Halo? So let me back up for a moment. Let me turn back time a little bit and talk a little bit about that. So this is also me. This game probably is not quite as recognizable. This is That's So Raven for the Nintendo DS. As you can see, my character is trying to keep Raven out, and as she so often does, she has to find clothing options to convince me that she's a science nerd and get past for story reasons that even I don't really follow. So that might not actually be far enough back. I'll talk about where that came in and how that happened. But going back a little bit further, in spring of 2006, this is a slide from a presentation that I gave at this university for people just like yourselves interested in possibly becoming game developers. At the time, I didn't really have a lot of experience. Most of what I got was out of books, out of writing to different companies and seeing what kind of responses I got. So now I can talk to it from a little bit more of an experience perspective. But the thing is, a lot of what I found back then still applies. Applying for a game design job or any game industry job has a lot of similarities with a lot of the other jobs that you might apply for, and the tips that you find are often going to apply just as well. I want to jump right into some tips, and I'll sort of spread these out through the lecture and interweave it with the actual story of how I got these jobs and my path, so that it won't just be this big info dump. So the first thing is, as I was kind of thinking about it, like what can I give them to take away from that is universal, whether they go into jobs with the game industry or anywhere else. And for me, it really comes down to preparation, diligence, and perseverance. Those are really the keys to any job application process, and especially in the game industry. And I'll get into a little bit of why that is. So the first thing is obviously you have to know where to find the jobs. You have to look for them, you have to find them, you have to make sure that the jobs are appropriate to your skills and where you want to go. So some examples of places that you might find game industry job boards. Gama Sutra is an awesome website. A job board is only a little portion of what they do. They're actually run by the same people who do the Game Developers Conference, and so there's a lot of articles. There's a lot that you can learn. You can just go to any one of their sections on programming, art, sound, and they'll have articles by experienced personnel from the industry talking about the work that they do. But they also have a very well-respected job board, so that's a great place to start. There are also sites like GameJobs.com, LinkedIn. Lots and lots of game developers are on LinkedIn. So if you're looking for companies, if you're looking to make contacts, that's a great place to look. There's also a site called creativeheads.net, which is a little bit less game-centric. They deal a lot with CG, hiring for movies, things like that. But all of these are great resources. If you want to be a little bit more clever and creative about where you go to look for jobs, the Game Developers Conference and E3, they have lists of companies that are at the GDC. They have a job fair, so you can look at the list. Even if you're not going to go to the job fair, these are companies that are actively hiring. You can generally go to their websites, and they'll have lists of the kinds of things that they're looking for. E3 doesn't have a job fair, but there again, if you look at the booth list, if you look at who's actually going to be presenting, these are companies that are going to be talking about games that are coming out, from the end of the year to a year or two on. So obviously that's a good sampling of who's active, who's going to be hiring, and even if somebody is finishing up a project, if it does well, they'll probably be moving on to something else. So generally, if you E3 happens in May usually. A lot of game hiring tends to happen around the time of GDC, which is usually in March to April. So you might miss a little bit of the hiring push that happens if you specifically use E3, but it's a great way to understand who's out there and who's active, because a lot of game companies go under, and it can be kind of difficult to tell whether a particular company is still active. You look at the website and it hasn't been updated in a while. That doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't active. They might just not focus on that. There's also the International Game Developers Association, and this is a little bit less about finding jobs. This is for people who have jobs in the industry to meet and connect and network. But they're generally broken down by location. So there'll be a group for Southern California, there'll be a group for Seattle, and they'll list out what the different companies the people who attend those meetings are from. So there again, you can get a sense of who's active, and if you have a particular feeling like, well, I'd like to live in San Francisco, I'd like to live in Seattle, something like that, that's going to be a good way to tell what those local companies are. Those also deal a little bit with some smaller developers. You're going to find a lot of EA, LucasArts, those sorts of things on the big job boards. The smaller developers aren't necessarily going to have the ability to advertise on something that's quite this big. So the IGDA sites are going to be a good way to find those. So once you've got that information, it's obviously pretty important to keep track of it. You have to contact the companies. You have to keep track of when you applied, who your contacts were. These things are always changing, but it's a really good way. When you're talking about applying for game jobs, you're talking generally in terms of like, I'm going to be looking for 6 months, I'm going to be looking for a year. And so it's really important to be able to say, okay, well, I haven't heard anything in a couple of weeks. Which companies do I need to go back and sort of touch base with, let them know that I'm still interested, find out, did you get my submission, is there someone that I can talk to, those sorts of things. So this is an example of a spreadsheet that I use, and it unfortunately hasn't been updated in a while, but you can see here some of the things that I felt were important to know. I've taken out any contact information. You should go and find that yourself. A lot of that probably isn't too up to date anyway. But when you go and apply for one of these jobs, or when you go for an interview, they're going to ask, have you played our games? Do you know what we've done? Do you know about the studio? So it's important to know who they make connections with. It's important to know what games they've got, what games you can talk about. I applied for Crystal Dynamics at one point for a junior level systems designer job, and they specifically said, we had just made Tomb Raider Legend. They were working on Tomb Raider Underworld. They flat out said to me in the interview, tell us some things we did wrong on our last game and how you would do them differently. So this was an example where I knew I was going to be flown out for the interview. I basically powered through Tomb Raider Legend, which I had never played before, but I knew that they were going to ask for it, and those were going to be the kinds of things that I was going to need to analyze. And so I was able to talk to, you've got a really interesting, not melee system, but a really interesting close combat system here, but your enemies fight from such a distance that you're not encouraged, the player isn't encouraged to use any of that. They're not getting close enough to be able to see this really interesting thing that you've done. So why don't you put in more enemies that rush? Why don't you put in even more, they had a few animals in Tomb Raider. Why don't you put in more animals? Tomb Raider Underworld comes out, there are tigers all over this particular level, and it's to do that sort of thing. It's to get the player involved in the systems that they developed. Give me a second. So the second thing that you obviously need to do is you need to read the job postings fairly closely and know which elements of the requirements and the responsibilities you can say, well, yeah, I've done things like this, or, well, no, I haven't done these things in particular, but you want to be able to speak to why they should still hire you despite that. If you, the first thing on here, 4 years of design experience. Does that mean that they're not going to take somebody with 3? No, but you should be able to talk to, well, these are the hats that I wore. These are the responsibilities that I took on that make me a better candidate for the position. One of the requirements that you'll pretty frequently see when applying for game jobs is must have shipped one title. Must have gotten one thing on the shelf, and obviously that's really tough for anybody in this room, because you can't get experience until you get hired, but they won't hire you without experience. And so you have to be able to talk to, for example, if you've led up a project at your university, talk about the management, talk about the communication with the other members of the team. That sort of thing can take the place of requirements for a job that you may not actually have. You also have to be sure that you understand what they're looking for in any submissions that you make. Obviously, any application should have a cover letter, should have a resume, you should follow up. But if you're an artist, do you have a portfolio, and how do you present that to them? For example, if you go to GDC, you should have a portfolio that you can just hand them and not have to worry about getting back. So just understanding. One of the other things that you can take from this, and take from especially the about page of a website. If you're applying for a job, you tend to go to the jobs listing, right? You don't really think about this about the company page that they've got there. That's going to be a really good place to get a good sense of what they think are the important what they think are important aspects of candidates. What sort of things that they're looking for, what the company culture is. You'll generally find a couple of key words that if you happen to slip it into an interview answer, if you happen to put it in your cover letter, they'll know that you did your homework. They'll understand, well, this person, especially if you speak to it in some meaningful way, they'll understand that this might be the kind of person who values the same sorts of things that we value. Okay, so the second one that I had listed is diligence. This is going to be pretty easy. I mean, everybody kind of knows what that is, but to put it as broadly as possible, diligence is going to be whatever you send in, take it as far as you can. If you've got a website and you've got some projects on there, make sure that they just speak to anyone who looks at them. Make sure that they are finished. Make sure that they are killer. Make sure that if it is a project, if it is something playable, especially, put it on there. Even if you're not quite happy with it, it'll show whether or not you can complete a project. It'll show how much attention to detail you have in some cases, and so you really just have to really push whenever you're going to apply for a job, no matter what that job is. But especially in the game industry, because games are developed on such short schedules. A year or two might seem like a really long time for any sort of job, but if you've got a project that's supposed to ship in a year, you're going to be worried. You're going to be putting in extra time. You're going to be just left with a sense that you're down to the wire, and you need the tools. You need to be making strides constantly. Check that. So diligence also means the kind of things that you're doing when you're looking for jobs. So checking the job boards, checking to see if the job boards have been updated. Every once in a while, once you've got some industry experience, you'll get contacted by headhunters. These are people whose job it is to say, this company is looking for a particular kind of person. They have an opening that they want to fill. I'm going to go out into the void, into LinkedIn. I'm going to talk to my contacts and see who they might know that's available. That's not really going to help you your first couple of times out. I haven't had terrific luck with headhunters. Met some very nice people, and they've put some good opportunities in front of me, but only one of those contacts, and I've had about a dozen, has really ever come to anything for me. So you really can't rely on that. You're going to have to be sort of self-powered when you're doing your searches. Sorry, I have a pretty involved outline here. You're going to have to be the one making contact. These companies often are busy, they're getting a lot of applicants for only a few jobs. They're really not going to contact you back, especially when you're first getting out there, first applying for jobs. So this is again why the spreadsheet comes in handy. You can look back and say, oh, it's been 2 to 3 weeks. I should probably check in with them, even if I checked in with them 2 to 3 weeks ago. So most of the contact is really on you. Like if they offer you a test, if they offer you an interview, if they offer to fly you out, those sorts of things generally mean that you've come pretty far along the process and they're actually seriously considering you. So up until then, it's really going to be, hey, have you looked at my resume? Have you looked at my website? Oh, I've got an update to my resume that I'd like you to see. So you really have to be diligent in putting yourself out there. And in some cases, you can even take this to a little bit of an extreme, and this could be a good thing. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is that if you go onto LinkedIn, you might be able to find people who work for the companies that you're excited about, and you could cold call them. You could find their email address, find their phone numbers, and you can call them up, say, hey, I'm trying to get in, and I'm not really getting anywhere. Can you put my information in front of somebody who's in a position to make something happen? So there again, a lot of people probably don't want to be bothered with that. So it's going to be about numbers. It's going to be about applying for 20 jobs to get one interview, things like that. So diligence is really an important part of it. I talked a little bit about following up. We'll get to some things about that later. You also want to be diligent about anything you submit to the company, right? So your resume, your cover letter, spell check these things. Have somebody else read over it. Make sure you don't have any errors that maybe the spell checker isn't going to pick up. Because, for example, one of the easiest things to kill your chances at a company is if you have a cover letter that you wrote for a different company, you copy and paste it, you've still got the old company name in there. They're going to know that you're not taking it seriously. So all of that stuff is just super, super important to letting the company know that you're serious, because every company that you talk to is going to have to think that they're your top choice. So that was a lot of information. There's some tips coming later, so I want to hold off about talking about perseverance for a moment and get back to the story. So all this stuff sounds really great, but it's kind of generic, right? I haven't said anything specifically about the industry. So here's the first step along my journey. Right before I graduated, I was lucky enough to get to go to the Game Developers Conference, GDC. And while I was there, I walked around the job fair, I handed out resumes, I talked to people from different booths, and one of the booths that I visited was Buena Vista Games. They have since changed to Disney Interactive. And I talked to some of the managers there, and they said, oh, well, have you heard about our internship program? And I was like, internship program? Game companies don't do internships, that's just crazy. Pretty much at the time it was. They had the only one that I could really find that would take a fairly large sampling of applicants rather than just you intern as being the sometimes you can get internships with like being a low-level implementer. You know, they have programmers, they need somebody who can handle the really easy stuff, the really small stuff. They might give that to an intern, but they don't really advertise for those. And so one of the unique things about this was that it was advertised, that they have this information out there. So they used to call it the think tank. After I left, they changed it to Experimental Game Lab. I'm not sure it's still running. Unfortunately, they got hit pretty hard by the recession. But at the think tank, it kind of sounds like the designer's dream. You get to go into a room with a group of your peers. The higher ups sort of hand you a project that like an idea for a project, and say, okay, well, go and work on that. Figure out how we could do it, how it would be cool. Make a pitch and bring it back in 2 months. And so you're like, great. I'm gonna sit and I'm going to look at YouTube videos of cats for the first couple of days, and there was that sort of freedom, and so it seems like a really great job. You get to be mentored by experienced designers. They were mostly at the production level at that point. In addition to mentoring us, they'd also be working on managing some of the teams that were working on some of their smaller projects. And you also get to pitch your own ideas. A lot of people think that when you get into the industry, your own ideas are what you bring to the company and what you get to what you use to make yourself a vital member of the project. And in a lot of cases that's true, but what it doesn't mean is that you get to say, oh, well, I think this would be great for our next game. That does not happen. So this seemed like really great because they would take our ideas, they would sort of talk over them, put together a presentation, and then they would actually take that to the upper management and say, well, you know, here's some of the things that we've got. Do you like any of these? And those would theoretically be put into actual development sometime in the future. But it doesn't necessarily turn out to be that way every time, and in particular, the the problem with the think tank internship was that you're not actually making games, right? It's not up to you whether or not the games get made, or how, like, you might come up with an idea that they then hand to a team who refactors it into something completely unrecognizable. So that was one problem. And the other problem is that it's a hard 6-month internship. You're there. There's no expectation afterwards that they'll get you a job on a company. So after 6 months, I was back in Arkansas living with my dad again, and okay, well, what do I do now? And so what I did with my time was I applied for things. I worked on my skills. This is a rare screenshot that I had totally forgotten about. This was an example of a test that I was working on when I was learning Unreal. Gears of War, the first Gears of War, had just come out while I was at the internship. This was an engine that you could get your hands on. I was like, I'm going to learn this. I know it's going to be taking off with the success of Gears of War. I know people are going to be using it, and I need to get my hands on this tech, and I need to understand that. In case you're interested, the building that I was starting to make is a monastery called Mont Saint Michel in France that I'd been to. It just has an interesting series of kinds of architecture, and I wanted to see how I could develop that. Here's another up close shot, and the other shot is from another thing that I was doing to sort of push my skills. I have a computer science degree, but I'm not a great programmer. I'm much better as a scripter. Scripting is sort of a light programming that a lot of companies do. That's in support of the gameplay that they want to make. So this is a Nintendo DS program that I was developing. Didn't really go anywhere, didn't really go too far, but here again it shows that I go out and I try these things, and I look for, obviously if you're going to be developing on a handheld system, that comes with its own challenges and its own tools, and this sort of self-directedness is something that companies really look for and respond to. So, after about 8 months of solid applying for things, solid working on my skills, every day, all day, 8 months later, I finally had an interview with a company that worked on the Unreal Engine. It's in Exile Entertainment. At the time, they were working on a game called Heist, which didn't ship. But before I get into that, let me talk briefly about what it was in my submissions, in my interview that caused them to hire me. Obviously, the first thing is passion. If you want to be in games, it's going to be a lot of work. It's a fast-moving industry. You're going to have to be passionate about games. You're going to have to be passionate about making games and about understanding games. Also, the company culture sort of worked hand in hand with this, because they're a company that would prefer not to crunch. They have a lot of family men, people who want to spend time with their kids, and a lot of new guys trying to get their start. So that helped me out. Familiarity with Unreal was a big thing, because they could give me a test, I could do the test in Unreal and hand it back to them, and they'd be able to run it and look at it and see that I knew how to use the tools and I knew how levels were constructed. Luck was actually a big part of it. You have to be applying at the point in the year when they're looking for something. You have to make sure that your application gets to somebody who can actually do something about it. And luck isn't really something that you can control, obviously. And it also has to do with getting someone at the company to take a chance on you. I recently found out from the guy who was in charge of hiring me that some of the people that I interviewed with were kind of not sure, that design really wasn't their thing, and I talked to a lot of design. He was able to say, no, this guy knows his stuff. He's going to be able to do good work for us. So I was hired onto Heist, and Heist is probably not a game that most of you have heard of. It didn't ship much prior to it not shipping. It also didn't get a lot of press. so things weren't exactly in a great state for this game shipping, and I'll talk in a minute about why that is. But to tell you a little bit about the game, it was a bank robbing game, which was kind of an interesting niche. I hadn't really heard of that sort of thing that frequently. They had a great voice cast. The character on the left was played by Bruce Campbell, who a lot of you will know from Evil Dead or cameos on Spider-Man movies, things like that. Ed Asner, Christian Slater, so some big names that were really a great part of keeping this project afloat when things weren't going so well. So my first day, I get there, I'm on this game, I'm like, yes, I'm going to do design. They didn't really have a whole lot of design for me to do at that point. The first thing that I did was, it's a game set in San Francisco. I laid down a whole bunch of volumes that the engine could tell when you were driving around, what street are you on, right? And that doesn't really require a lot of design. I also did testing for a month because they didn't have that many internal testers. So it sort of felt like, okay, well, I'm in and I'm working on games, and that's great, but is this really what design is? And in a lot of cases, it sort of is. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of having ideas, implementing ideas, and those sorts of things, but design, and especially level design, is sort of the confluence of programming and art and sound. All of these things get put into the levels that you play by the designers. And so there'll be just crazy, like, okay, well, I'm not really sure how to do that, but I'll go ahead and make some progress on it anyway. Like coming up with a conversation system. You know, if this character talks and this character talks, like, how do we not have them interrupt each other, or how do we make the conversations easy to implement so that the sound guy doesn't have to go in and spend all day doing these sorts of things. So that was the first thing that I really learned as a level designer was you're reliant on everyone in the company, because all of the work that they do fuels into the things that you're putting into the engine, and all of your ideas, like, oh, well, I think that the bank vault should look like this, and here's how the character is going to interact with it. You don't make that. The artist makes that. The programmer makes that. And so you have to have this really good back and forth with everybody on the team. I've heard a bit described as being the quarterback of the development company. So it also involves a lot of constant learning. Like I said, there's always new technology coming out. There's always new tasks that maybe you haven't seen before. You have to be able to adapt. And I mean, that's a lot of why you're here at a university, right? Is to learn how to think, how to break down a problem. And so those skills are absolutely vital in being a designer. So it often feels like you don't really know what you're doing at first. You'll have to say, okay, well, this is the task that I'm given. I need a programmer's help. Can I get a programmer to come help me look at why the AI isn't pathing right in this area? Why this sound isn't playing? You know, there's a lot of well, I'm not quite sure where to start. I need to get some help, and that's something to not be afraid of. Another thing that I learned, and this is probably important, especially for people who think, well, you know, I'd like to get into the industry. I think they do interesting work, but I don't play a lot of games. You know, I haven't played the latest Grand Theft Auto. I haven't played Halo. You know, not everyone who works in games is a gamer. That's just an easy thing to say, and so if you're not the biggest gamer, don't worry about it. It shouldn't keep you from moving into the industry if that's your dream. So let me talk a little bit about why Heist didn't ship. The first thing is that the Unreal Engine is not good for making open world games. It can do it. This is a Grand Theft Auto style game, a little bit. There wasn't as much actual content because it's a smaller company, and that was a problem. But for example, the streaming of the Unreal Engine had to be completely rewritten for this project because it simply isn't meant to handle that sort of load, that sort of constant, like, I'm driving at 60 miles an hour, it needs to load the buildings ahead of me, and what happens if I turn? Then it's suddenly loaded these in, and it has to know to drop those and bring in some other ones. So that was a big challenge for the entire team. So maybe they were not doing well out of the gate. Maybe they took on a project that was a little bit more ambitious than they could pull off. Another thing is that sometimes the tasks that seem to us to be simple are actually very difficult for a computer to replicate. The classic example is pathfinding, right? If I need to walk out of the room, I have a fairly good idea of how to do that, especially if people walk into my way or I have to avoid things. That's actually really complicated. In particular on Heist, what we ran into were just silly little things, like you had the ability to rob diners, and it turned out to actually be a real technical challenge just to get an NPC to sit in a diner and then stand up when the robbery started. That was something that was a challenge, and they had to keep revisiting it. And so those sorts of programming problems actually were a lot of why the game didn't reach the polish level that it needed to finally ship. Relationship with publishers was also a bit of an issue. It was being published by Codemasters, who are a fine publisher. They put out some decent titles, but we didn't have a great relationship with them. We were occasionally late on delivering things. In particular, one of my first tasks, since I spent that first month just playing the game, I was the most familiar with the game and driving around, and so I was brought into a meeting with the publishers where I was told, okay, you're going to be demoing the game, drive slowly. The streaming engine wasn't ready to be shown off with the at full speed. They wanted me to drive slowly so that the publisher wouldn't see how bad things were, and that's really not a situation that you want to be in from either side. So, like I said, we sort of missed some milestones or under-delivered on some milestones.